Okay, well, welcome to the Edgar Rice Burroughs podcast, episode 4. My name is Tim DeForest. I'm the author of a couple of books on pre-digital pop culture, such as the pulp magazines that Burroughs published his stories in, and old-time radio, newspaper comics, and other things. And with me today are Jess. Go ahead.
Jess, Terrell, you would know me as one of the admins in the Facebook discussion group for the love of all things Edgar Rice Burroughs.
And Scott.
Now, I'm Scott Stewart up here in the great North Woods. I do a lot of freelance editing, a lot of freelance writing and ghostwriting. So I'm very glad to be with you guys tonight.
Thanks. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about Return of Tarzan, the second Tarzan novel, which all three of us, I think, have rated as one of our favorites. This was originally published in New Story magazine, serialized from the June through the December issues. Actually, it's kind of interesting. The Tarzan of the Apes, the first one, which was very successful, was published in All Story magazine, and the editor of All Story made probably the worst editorial decision of all time in turning down the sequel, which is why Burroughs took it to New Story magazine and had it published there. That original publication also featured several cover illustrations by N.C. Wyeth. It was published as a hardcover book in 1915. Which was reprinted a number of times. It had a little big book edition in 1936. It was adapted as a comic strip, a newspaper comic strip in 1929 by artist Rex Maxon. It started getting paperback reprints, mostly by Ballantine Books in the 1960s, which included in 1975 an edition with an absolutely wonderful Neil Adams cover on it, one of my favorite Tarzan book covers. And today it's in the public domain, so it's easily available as an ebook, free on several sites. And as I said, it's one of our favorite Tarzan novels. It really is an excellent novel that encompasses a lot of. It has a lot of plot in it, a lot of plot twists, and a lot of story to it. And we're going to start off with a plot summary. Jess, you were going to do the first 6 chapters, I believe.
Indeed, and we'll start with chapter 1. And before we do that, I would say that this entire book can be summed up, and there's a lot going on in this book, so I hesitate to use the word some, but certainly a big question that is addressed in this book: does Tarzan belong in civilization or in the jungle? He's trying to find his place, and he's being pulled both directions. As we know, he's much more comfortable in the jungle, but he also wants the companionship of his own kind.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just going to enthusiastically agree with that. It is a very strong theme that runs through the book.
Very good. But on that note, though, let me encourage both of you to, by all means, jump in with questions, points, corrections, comments, whatever. Don't hesitate to do that. So at the end of Tarzan of the Apes, Tarzan has elected to follow Jane all the way to Wisconsin here in the USA. And he is about to make a pitch for her, but elects not to. He even finds out that he is Lord Greystoke. Fingerprint test that Darnot had arranged proved that he was Greystoke. But Tarzan feels that Jane is better off with his cousin, William Cecil Clayton, and that the title, the estate, and the monies and such that go with that would provide for comfort for Jane, and she'd be better off in that regard. So Tarzan decides to return to France to visit Darnot, and he's on an ocean liner where we find him there in chapter 1. And in conjunction with the question that was posed by yours truly just a moment ago, Tarzan yearns for human companionship. One of the things that he has learned since he discovered other human beings some 4 years previously was that he wants companionship of his own kind. Now, certainly he appreciates the Mangani and feels very comfortable with them, but that's just not quite the same. And it took him, of course, he had to learn that as he was growing up. So on board the ocean liner going back to France, he meets the Countess Olga de Coude, her husband, Raoul de Coude, and two shady characters, Nicholas Rokoff and his sidekick Alexis Paulvich. Now let's note that Rokoff is Countess's brother, and those two shady characters are Russian, for what that's worth. The Countess Olga Dekud is 20 years old. She's an attractive young woman married to a 40-year-old man. It was an arranged marriage, but the Burroughs tells us that she's faithful, but she does want someone her own age to talk with. She happens to notice Tarzan, Monsieur Tarzan of Africa. My French is not so good, by the way. So we see Tarzan in the smoking room sipping his absinthe, smoking and drinking. He's smoking cigarettes and reflecting on his recent decisions, notably Jane. And he recaps some of the decision process he went through in Wisconsin, which tells us what's on his mind, as well as bringing the reader up to date as to where we are in the storyline. But the bottom line is Tarzan just wants Jane to be happy, and as I said earlier, he feels he'll be happier with the arrangements that he made for the Greystoke title and such. In fact, quote here is that Tarzan learned that in civilization without money and position, life was unendurable. That's a direct quote. Mm-hmm. And this way he knew that Jane be provided for.
Yeah, and I believe that's because Jane felt she had to marry John Clayton because she'd already promised it. So that was the impetus for Tarzan to just give up the title or not mention that he actually was in line for the title so that Jane could have access to that fortune.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Now, on board the ocean liner, I mentioned the Countess. Her husband, Count Raoul Decoud, as a man was high in the French Ministry of War. Now, Tarzan became aware of a card game going on in this smoking room that involved the Count and those two unsavory characters that I mentioned a moment ago, Rokoff and Paulvich. Mm-hmm. While he was watching the card game, Tarzan was thinking about how he had renounced his birthright and that the Lord Greystoke title was rightfully his. And he was concerned about missing companionship of other humans, so he was just really at a crossroads and did not know what to do. Earlier, Tarzan had noticed two men whispering, and that was Rokoff and Paulvich. One of them was now playing cards with some others, including the Count Raoul Decoud. The second conspirator entered and stealthily placed something in the Count's pocket. The first man accused the Count of cheating, claiming he saw the Count place cards in his pocket. Tarzan intercepted the second man and revealed the plot to the card players. The Count recognized Nicholas Rokoff and Alexis Paulvich and asked Tarzan to drop the matter. Rokoff told Tarzan he would regret interfering. And thanks to Tarzan, the Count is proven innocent. Rokoff and Paulvich swear vengeance. In fact, they become recurring characters in this story and in another. Mm-hmm. Rokoff threatens Tarzan with this statement: Monsieur will have ample opportunity to regret his interference in the affairs of others. But Tarzan's not worried at all. Later that night, Tarzan finds a threatening note under his door, but he easily goes to sleep. The Count tells his wife about Rokoff and Paulvich, that they are on board and of the attempt to frame him for cheating at cards. The Countess, asked her husband not to take the matter to the captain. And she assures her husband that she hates her brother Rokoff. And as the story evolves, I can say that, at least from what the reader sees or reads, that seems to be a very true statement. Moving into Chapter 2, Forging Bonds of Hate, Tarzan is still speculating on, after the card game now, Tarzan is still speculating on the numerous instances of human cruelty, selfishness, and spite that he'd seen, say, in the last 4 years since he first discovered other human beings. The death of Kala, for example, and some of the cruelties that he had seen. And this is a direct quote from the book, which I think is significant. They are all alike, speaking of human beings, cheating, murdering, lying, fighting, and all for things that the beasts of the jungle would not deign to possess, money to purchase the effeminate pleasures of weaklings, yet bound down by silly customs that make them slaves to their unhappy lot, while firm in the belief that they be the lords of creation, enjoying the only real pleasures of existence. In the jungle, the quote goes on, in the jungle, One would scarcely stand supinely aside while another took his mate. It is a silly world, an idiotic world, and Tarzan of the Apes was a fool to renounce the freedom and happiness of its jungle to come into it. So again, Tarzan's trying to find his place in life.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of bitterness there, too, because he's met people like Jane and D'Arnot, so he knows there are honorable men in civilization, that they're not all alike. But he's got, understandably, I think, feeling a little bitter about things at the moment.
Well, and that's a very good point, because survival of the fitness and survival of the fittest, would come into play in the jungle. If someone is not capable, then they would a creature in the jungle is not capable, they would not survive. And yet here in humanity, the weak and the strong both survive. Or maybe you have to be strong in an unsavory manner, perhaps.
Yeah.
Which is not.
I find it interesting too in the narrative and what you're recounting here, the fact that he would try tobacco, he would drink. He's trying to fit in with what he thinks you're supposed to be doing as a man.
Yeah,
but still retains that, if you want to call it, what we look upon a lot of times, talking about that wild man jungle honor, even though, animals kill animals to eat and fight, there's not always, they don't have the thinking process we do, but when he gave up his title for Jane, and when he tries to honor the Countess and the other episodes we'll see here, he's trying to find that balance, and that's actually deeper writing than people give Edgar Rice Burroughs credit for.
It really is. And I think this is this the only instance in any of the books we see Tarzan smoking? I think he did try it as part of fitting in with civilization, but then probably was worried it would affect the keenness of his senses and gave it up.
He may have, with some of the times when he's meeting with some tribes, maybe like, the generic peace pipe type thing.
Yeah.
But there are a couple instances of that, but I can't remember exactly where.
And that's a very good question, though, about the smoking thing. I cannot think of any such instances. Now, there may have been the occasion, as you just described. But he was certainly not. There was nothing in the books about him making a regular habit of it.
Yeah.
Nothing. Now, later on, Tarzan does catch Rockoff and Paulvich threatening the Countess again, and Rockoff draws a revolver and tries to fire. Tarzan grabs it and throws it overboard. Again, Rockoff threatens revenge. Later on, overhears him say something. Does somebody have a comment?
Oh, I was just going to say, if he'd thrown Rockoff overboard at that point, we would have had 2 less books in the series.
Well, that's a very good point. These guys are permitted to survive, I think, so that they can provide mischief and mayhem. And that thought has occurred to me as well. Not my nature to throw people overboard, but gee whiz.
Yeah.
One threats those decisions. So Tarzan overhears Rockoff and Paulvich scheming against the Countess and follows them. The Countess Olga de Kood, opens the door for Rockoff, tells her to leave him. She tells him to leave her alone, and Rockoff and Paulvich enter the room. Paulvich threatens that newspapers will hear that Olga was entertaining a man in her cabin. Scandalous in those days. Tarzan hears a scream, breaks down the door, and sees Paulvich choking Olga. Olga insists the situation be kept secret. Tarzan, of course, comes to her rescue. Tarzan tells Rockoff that if he or Paulvich bothered Olga again, Tarzan would call them to account for it. Olga expresses her gratitude. Now, Chapter 3, Tarzan has made his way to Paris. He is visiting with D'Arnot, and D'Arnot is immediately fussing at him for renouncing his title. Tarzan explains the title means little to him, and to accept it would take it from William Cecil Clayton and from Jane. And by the way, I may refer to him, that is Jane's fiance. I may refer to him as Cecil or William Cecil.
Yeah, okay.
Clayton. But guy. I just noticed that in my notes here. But so Tarzan begins to enjoy the temptations of Paris. There's more smoking and there's more drinking. He likes his absinthe. One night while visiting a music hall, Tarzan senses he's being watched. And after leaving, Tarzan hears a scream for help. He finds a woman amidst a dozen attackers, one of whom is Rockoff. The men attack Tarzan. And Tarzan's jungle training and instincts kick in, and he knocks several of the attackers down, including Rockoff, and some of those guys flee. Rockoff calls the police, who arrive to find Tarzan with a woman and 3 men groaning on the floor. You get this. The woman tells the police that Tarzan was the attacker and that the other men came to her aid. Tarzan tries to tell his side of the story, but one of the policemen advances upon Tarzan, puts his hand on Tarzan. Tarzan leaves him and the other policeman crumpled on the floor, and Tarzan escapes. So in Chapter 4, back in D'Arnot's apartment, Tarzan tells D'Arnot about the night's happenings, his encounter with the ruffians that he was trying to save the girl from, his encounter with the police. D'Arnot takes Tarzan to the police to tell his story to an official who's a close friend of D'Arnot's. It pays to have friends. Mm-hmm. Upon hearing the story of Tarzan's life and the adventure of the previous night, the police forgive the manner. This is another direct quote. This is Tarzan speaking to the police, and he says, and I quote, "I am sorry for the mistake I made. Let us be friends." And that was the end of the entire matter. That's unquote there. But Tarzan was a great deal of conversation in the police barracks. Tarzan receives a letter, no, I beg your pardon. D'Arnot receives a letter from an English friend that tells of the upcoming wedding of Jane Porter and William Cecil Clayton. And that night, Tarzan attends the opera, but Tarzan has trouble enjoying it as he's thinking all about Jane. He does see Olga, the Countess de Coude, looking at him. He goes over to visit the Countess's box, and they are seen by Rockoff and Paulvitch again. These guys keep popping up. Olga tells Tarzan she has much to tell him, but cannot do so at the opera. So they make plans to meet the next afternoon. So the next day, Tarzan visits the Count's palace, Olga's house, and they speak of many things, including Rockoff. She tells Tarzan that Rockoff is a Russian spy who's trying to extract secrets that are in possession of the Count. And Tarzan asks, why don't you just turn Rockoff over to the authorities? And she explains that Rockoff is her brother. Tarzan leaves. Rockoff comes in where he was hiding and threatens to tell her husband of an affair with Tarzan if she does not do as he tells her. Of course, everything was all above board. No hanky-panky going on there, but that's a tough thing to prove. Chapter 5, the plot that failed. Tarzan visits the Countess regularly for the next month, sometimes alone. Rockoff, now, one night while the Count is out, Rockoff has Paulvitch call Tarzan with the message that the Countess needs to see him. And Paulvitch pretends to be one of the Countess's house workers. Paulvitch carries a note to the Count saying that a man was with his wife. Tarzan goes to see Olga, who is dressed for bed. She wasn't expecting him and says she has not sent for him. Tarzan figures out it's a Rockoff plot. He tries to comfort Olga. Circumstances get the better of them, and they kiss. Passionately, I'm sure. The Count arrives just in time to see all this. He strikes Tarzan with his walking stick. Tarzan attacks the Count, as we know Tarzan can. He throws the Count's body to the floor and gives the cry of the bull ape. Tarzan realizes what he's done, comes to his senses, helps revive the Count, and then leaves. Tarzan does go to Rockoff's house. And upon threat of death, Rockoff writes a confession of the plot and promises that the newspapers will not hear of it. Tarzan then tells Rockoff to leave France. Well, there's still the Count to deal with because he's been wronged, which takes us to Chapter 6 and a duel. The next day, Tarzan tells D'Arnot about the events at the Count de Coude home. The Count challenges Tarzan to the duel. Tarzan accepts the challenge, selecting pistols as the weapon. D'Arnot thinks Tarzan will be killed. Tarzan remains calm about the whole thing. He does not fear death. Tarzan does write letters for D'Arnot to deliver. We never find out who those letters are written to. I can speculate, but we don't find that out. On the day of the duel, Tarzan and de Coude are each given a pistol with 3 shots. They stand back to back, and they do have a doctor present, by the way. They stand back to back, walk 10 paces, and turn. De Coude fires. Tarzan leaves the pistol at his side. De Coude fires again, and de Coude's certain that both shots have hit Tarzan, but he hasn't fallen yet. De Coude's a little frustrated with all this because Tarzan's not firing back. Tarzan then offers his pistol to the Count, saying that only by death could he atone for the wrong he had done, which I think this is really a very noble approach that Tarzan is taking, risking his life, needless to say, but he's standing up for justice and for what's right. highly principled man who has grown up in this jungle.
Yeah, I actually think this is one of Tarzan's most awesome moments, is just standing there taking bullets rather and not fighting back because he knows he's wronged or the Count, and this is his way of atoning for that. It really just says a lot about Tarzan's nobility and his character and his sense of right and wrong.
Very well said.
It also reminds me of, because I'm sure ERB was a reader too, of the duel the Count of Monte Cristo has with one of his enemy's sons, where he stands there and takes the bullet too. I see a big parallel in that. You're talking about the true, if you want to call it, almost lordship honor that they're taking on.
Mm-hmm.
Good point. It would seem to me, thankfully I've never been in this position, but it would seem to me it would be the gentlemanly thing. Tarzan does, after all the shooting is over, what Tarzan does explain that Olga had no blame in the matter. That's the Countess de Coude. Mm-hmm. And he gives to the Count Rokoff's confession. Everyone becomes friends. The doctor treats Tarzan's 2 wounds, and the Count finds a job for Tarzan with the Ministry of War, which involves travel. Tarzan leaves Paris for Marseilles and Oran, which takes us to the next chapter.
Yeah, and it's kind of neat. Actually, it's that ERB chose to put all this story in it. It's good storytelling, and it introduces important characters, including Rokoff, who's going to be an important enemy. And he doesn't instantly take Tarzan back to the jungle. He keeps him in this like fish out of water situation for quite a while before getting him back into the jungle, and it opens up all sorts of storytelling possibilities that might not have been there otherwise. It really shows Burroughs' skill as a storyteller.
Well said.
I agree with that, yes.
If anybody has anything else to comment on this, otherwise we move on to Scott's going to summarize Tarzan's adventure as a spy. Tarzan as James Bond.
Yes, and Return of Tarzan was the first book I read when I was in 3rd grade, after seeing mostly the Weissmuller movies and some of the Gordon Scott and those on TV or at the Saturday matinee. And when I came on this and it started off, I knew Tarzan, talking with apes, etc., the way I thought of it as a kid, and started reading this book and seeing him in civilization like this. That whole thing about if you want to call it the James Bond thing, or Mike Henry did it in some of his movies, the wild man, the ape man in civilization, and knowing who he is and the power he has, and almost that Superman type thing. It appealed to me a lot. So the secret agent thing here gave me a whole different definition of Tarzan whenever I watched movies or read the later books on where he was, as opposed to maybe if I'd read the origin first, the first book. So yeah, this is a great part. He ends up going to Algiers because he's been given an assignment. They believe there's a traitor in the Legion or in the military down there with the French Army or French Foreign Legion. And he arrives in Algiers, and he has some different adventures. He's going in one town he needs to go to is called Sidi Assisa, I believe it's called, or Sidi Aissa, if that pronunciation's right. And there he meets a sheikh and buys a horse from him and works with him, which then comes in handy later on because in the course of the time or the day, he hires a young man, Arabian, named Abdul, who will be a translator and sort of a guide for him. And they're out eating, I'd say a supper or dining late at night in what we might call a cabaret. And they've also noticed that they get the feeling when they look back that someone's telling them. They don't really know why or what's going on. I'll just jump ahead and say that it is our good old friend
Rokoff.
Rokoff, thank you. Rokoff, as he said, he's going to continue to be a thorn in Tarzan's side. While he's dining in a place and they have dancing girls there, people who are targeting him, and we don't know it's Rokoff as being one of them right at this time yet, pay her to get his attentions, and also hoping the local men will join in with the fight when someone else comes in to try and bait him and start a fight with them. But he is acting as Tarzan, respecting her, not doing the clawing, etc., while she's performing and dancing. And she leans over to him to say that, there are men who want to hurt you. You need to get out of here soon. And giving him warning. Of course, the guy comes in, and it turns into just a huge fight. Tarzan tries to play it down and ignore him at first, but when it comes time to take action, Burroughs describes him as having a half smile. He knows he wants to retain the, if you want to call it, humane way of acting among people, but there's something in the fact that this guy really deserves a beating. He's ready to unleash a little bit. And it turns into a chase out of the club there. He describes alleyways that now we would know would be hovels or rooms for dancing girls or prostitutes out there. He doesn't use that exact language, but they make their way through there in the stairways. And this girl, whose name is called the Ulid Nails is what they call her. And I'm still never quite sure if that's truly her name or if that's almost a term that he gave her as the dancer in the story. But she helps him escape. There's a mob of men now trying to find them, Abdul, Tarzan, and her, because the two are with Tarzan. They're targeted now too, and she manages to take them through some rooms, and they think they're trapped, but he does the stuff we always like, where he bails out the window and hoofs her up over the roof and takes Abdul up over the roof, and they're up there and no one can find them because they're up in a place no man could normally climb or bring anyone else with. So,
if I may jump there, that's that moment is captured on the cover of Return of Tarzan, Barclay Shaw artwork. We've got a picture of it there on the video of Tarzan scaling the wall on the outside of that building with the young lady got her arms wrapped around him, going up as they go.
Yeah, I think I believe I have that edition. I think it came out about 12 or 15 years ago or something like that. It's a great painting.
1990.
Okay. 99. Yeah, that's a good one, and that illustrates that. And instead of going through all the details, because he has a number of times, several times where he goes out in the desert and then comes back into town out in the desert and comes out where he faces down with different tribes and betrayals and stuff like that. He does return the girl to her father. She tells him she was kidnapped 2 years ago and forced as a slave to be a dancer there. Well, it turns out to be Sheikh Ben Saden, who he'd had lunch with and bought a horse from just earlier. So the Sheikh is very, very happy to have his daughter back, and helps him several times throughout the rest of the escapades as a secret agent. But his main part still is he's trying to find out about this lieutenant, I think it's Lieutenant Genoy, who they believe is betraying him. While Genoy is on to him, realizing that he's trying to get him. He gets information on him because of Rockoff. And they have several different escapades and traps back and forth, including one time when he ambushes him and shoots him, but it's not a fatal wound, and he's taken to an Arabian camp and tied up there. And that's where Rockoff comes in and tells him, I'm here in Tarzan, I'm going to see that you're killed tonight. Well, the Sheikh's daughter, who is the dancer he helped, ends up coming and hearing about his being captured, and their camps aren't that far apart. She's able to sneak in and free him. And as they escape the camp, they end up in the mountains, and there's a legend about let me get the name right here. It's the black lion.
Numa El Adrea?
Yeah, Numa El Adrea. Yeah, and instead of describing all the things here, I want to read these two paragraphs from the book, because I love the way Burroughs leads up to it. And by the way, the chase sequences here, where he first ends up in the cabaret with the dance girl, and to go from there to escaping, to going to the shake, and then going on another desert chase, and being captured and getting away, and the missions back and forth. Burroughs does this great job of layering one point onto another. And one of the things, if you've ever been in a film screenwriting class, they say escalate the action. You know, and as we're talking about coincidence with Burroughs, it can be a coincidental action too, but it escalates in what seems to us a normal and logical manner, and it happens so cleanly and happens so quickly we can't really catch our breath. We can see what's going on, we know what's going on, and you keep on turning those pages. And of course, that's one reason he wrote so many books and was so popular. He's a master of doing that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, they're here now in the around the desert and hills area. As Numa Eldrea launched himself with widespread paws and bared fangs, he looked to find this puny man as easy prey as a score who had gone down beneath him in the past. To him, man was a clumsy, slow-moving, defenseless creature. He had little respect for him. But this time he found that he was pitted against a creature as agile and as quick as himself. When his mighty frame struck the spot where the man had been, he was no longer there. The watching girl was transformed by astonishment at the ease with which the crouching man eluded the great paws. And now, O Allah, he had rushed in behind Eldrea's shoulder before the beast could turn, and had grasped him by the mane. The lion reared upon his hind legs like a horse. Tarzan had known that he would do this, and he was ready. A giant arm encircled the black maned throat. Once, twice, a dozen times the sharp blade darted in and out of the bay black side behind the left shoulder. Frantic were the leaps of Numa. Awful were his roars of rage and pain. But the giant upon his back would not be dislodged or brought within reach of fangs or talons in the brief interval of life that remained to the lord with the large head. He was quite dead when Tarzan of the Apes released his hold and arose. Then the daughter of the desert witnessed a thing that terrified her even more than had the presence of Eldrea. The man placed a foot upon the carcass of his kill, and, with his handsome face raised toward the full moon, gave voice to the most frightful cry that ever had smote upon her ears.
Yeah.
That's why I love Tarzan stories.
Yeah, it's
well done.
Yeah, it's a great fight scene. Burroughs, in addition to his other strengths, he just had a talent for writing really exciting fight scenes and choreographing the action well, so that it made sense in context of the story.
Exactly, and you know, it isn't the idea. I'm not glorifying it because he's killing an animal. It's just the way his narrative of it and describing it is simple, clean, and to the point. It's excellent.
I want to be sure to say, if I may, that's one of my favorite passages too. I'm trying to learn how to write myself, and I want to learn how to write to action. I go read a Burroughs passage just like that one. Also, I think it's interesting that I had trouble saying Tarzan earlier, but I was able to whip out Numa Eldrea with no problem whatsoever.
Score one for you, Jess.
I reckon, but subtract one for inability to say Tarzan. That's something there. But choice on a passage, I enjoyed it immensely. You did a fine job with it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, thank you. And I kind of bring up the other points going here. He, like I said, there are so many. It's amazing the amount of the secret agent part we're talking about here, and I'm going to come up to the summary with where he moves on out from here. But this could have been a book in itself. And I was thinking of some other writers, and writers who I enjoy. It's not meant to be a put down on them, but like, say, Lynn Carter and a couple of them. They'll do a thinner novel, and this could have been a book 2 or 3 in a series and done some of the adventures here, where I always thought of Return of Tarzan as being a smaller book than Tarzan Apes, but they're within about 24 pages of each other. They're both very full novels. They have multiple stories and storylines and character lines.
Yeah, And Burroughs was a master of pacing, so it's really it's just really impressive that he fits all these different kind of sub stories into this one novel, and does it so well. It never feels crowded or nothing feels unnecessary. It all just flows along nicely.
Yeah, yeah. And there's so many points here, and that's one reason I'm not going to read them all off. But I'm using a cheat sheet. Excellent book I recommend called The Tarzan Chronologue.
Mm-hmm.
And earlier, Jess, you had mentioned about the not to get off subject here, but the Heritage of the Flaming God, and I have those together on the bookshelf. So when I was looking at them, I said, I need this because there's so many points here. I could rattle off 100 different points of all the action things that happen in this part of the book, but it would get a little redundant. But he does find out about the connection between Rokov and Jernoi, and he ends up again coming close to killing Rokov and just saying, "Just leave people alone." I think Tarzan says, "This is your last chance. If we meet again, you're a dead man, or one of us is going to be dead." And then shortly after that, Lieutenant Jernoi sees Tarzan alive, who he thought was dead, and realizes he has the information and that Jernoi is going to be turned in, be compromised, and he ends up killing himself. So that takes care of a good chunk of the secret agent area there, and he gets orders to move on to go down to Cape Town, and ends up on a ship there to leave from Algiers down to Cape Town. And on that ship, he ends up meeting a young lady named Hazel Strong, who he realizes is Jane Porter's best friend, the lady he's in love with, because he'd seen her name written on letters when he was spying on Jane in the cabin. She was writing letters to her friend from the cabin there in the hopes that she could ever somehow mail them to her or return to civilization to give her thoughts to them. So he makes friends with her while he's on the ship, and he meets someone else named Thuran, who kind of keeps his head down and stuff. Well, it's a clean-shaven Rokov, and Rokov and Fletch are on the ship again. And Tarzan finally figures out who it is. He says, "You leave Hazel Strong alone. I see you looking at her. Leave her alone." And as some time goes by on the ship, they do manage to, Povich and Rokov do manage to get Tarzan flipped overboard and out into the sea, leaving Hazel Strong to think, when she discovers that he's gone, that he had fallen overboard and died. And I'm going to leave that part of the secret agent off, so we can go on to the next section.
Yeah. I tell you, when I first read this one as maybe a 12-year-old, I was actually a little embarrassed for Tarzan that he let Rokov sneak up behind him on that ship. That just seemed like, that's Tarzan. How can he let somebody sneak up behind him? But
you know, we read that passage here again this week to just go through it. Burroughs gets you to believe, okay, it could happen. And it could happen, really.
It could.
He snuck up on, he just keeps it short, clean, and quiet. Talks about the drone of the engine and the waves, and Tarzan lost and thought about Jane Porter and looking out in the darkness because it's moonless night, and those guys spending a great deal of time to basically crawl up behind him, suddenly grab his legs and flip him over.
Yeah.
Well, it could happen, but I was embarrassed. It's like, come on, Superman, how many times can kryptonite get pulled on you?
Yeah.
It's that glowing thing in the Lex Luthor's hand there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, along those lines, I've for a long time felt that Tarzan was missing the opportunity to detect Povich's and Rokov's scent. Mm-hmm. However, I've come to the conclusion, and I have no basis for this, no facts to back it up. I have to think they're just wearing aftershave and changing the odor frequently to throw the Tarzan's nasal ability.
That could be the explanation. It might not even have been intentional. They would have been wearing cologne or aftershave and not even have thought it through. It was just they lucked out on that.
Yeah.
So, but either way, I think that works. So
it still makes for it still makes for a fine story. I mean, any shortcomings and inadequacies Burroughs' fine writing always makes up for it.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and I agree with Scott. Rereading it as an adult, Burroughs did make it fairly believable because of the circumstances, the noise of the engine, and all that. That somebody could get up behind him under those circumstances. So it's not really that much of a stretch. The one other thing I want to mention from this section is I still remember thinking it was remarkable. At one point, Tarzan and Abdul are in a gunfight with some of the bad guys that they encounter, and I just always thought it's one of the few times Tarzan uses a gun in the series. Was one instance during that spy section.
He also uses a rifle to kill a lion earlier too.
I think he does, yeah. So, but anyway, the story continues with Tarzan. Now he's thrown off the ship. He gets to the jungle. It's West Africa, near where he grew up, and he decides at this point, the heck with it. I'm in the jungle. I'm just going to stay in the jungle. So he makes a conscious decision to just give up civilization and stay in the jungle. But so he needs his weapons. He needs a bow and arrow and all of that. So he spots a black warrior who will turn out to be Pasuli, the son of the chief of the Wazari tribe. And this is, I think, one of the most impressive parts of this novel, because in the first novel, in Tarzan and the Apes, the only blacks he encountered were the cannibal tribe that had killed his adopted mother Kala, and were a brutal people that tortured prisoners and ate human flesh and all of that. So he considered all blacks his enemies. And when D'Arnot was bringing him back to civilization towards the end of the first book, D'Arnot actually had to talk Tarzan out of simply killing any black guy they came across. And so when Tarzan first sees Basili, he thinks just automatically, here's a black guy, I can kill him, I'll take his weapons. And I've got to read a section from the novel here. As he stalked the unconscious man, new thoughts presented themselves to the ape man, thoughts born of the refining influence of civilization and of its cruelties. It came to him that seldom, if ever, did civilized man kill a fellow being without some pretext, however slight. It was true that Tarzan wished this man's weapons and ornaments, but was it necessary to take his life to obtain him? The longer he thought about it, the more repugnant became the thought of taking human life needlessly. And thus it happened that while he was trying to decide just what to do, they had come to a little clearing at the side of which lay a palisaded village of beehive huts. And then there's a short passage where Numa, a lion, threatens the black guy, and then to continue to quote from the novel, with the instant that Tarzan realized the native's danger, his attitude towards his erstwhile prey altered completely. Now he was a fellow man threatened by a common enemy. And then he saves Basili from the lion, and they become friends, and he becomes accepted in the Wazari village as a friend. And for a novel written in 1913, that's really remarkable. You know, Burroughs does use racial stereotypes sometimes, but here he's presenting blacks as a human being. He's presenting Tarzan's initial attitude that all blacks were his enemies as being wrong, and he accepts the blacks in the village as his equals, and in fact, for a time, plans to become a permanent part of the Wazari tribe. And it just really is an astonishing, for the time it was written, quite an astonishing passage, I think.
I've said that Tarzan grows through the course of the first few books. And I think Burroughs grew as a human being also.
I think he did, yes. He was less likely to use overt stereotypes as time went on.
Exactly.
There's an interesting reflection I hadn't thought about before, but when you're talking, Jess, when you mentioned about how he grows.
Yes.
And Tim, when you're reading that section there, maybe that's part of what trying to capture that moment too when the last Tarzan movie, in which he's up against the chief there, and the chief is going, but he was my son, and Tarzan's going, but he killed my mother. He's like, but he was my son, he was a boy. And maybe they're trying to capture this part that we're talking about here, that you're talking about.
I think they were.
Good point.
Yeah. So Tarzan joins the Missouri tribe, and while he's out on an elephant hunt with some of the with a big chunk of the warriors, Arab slavers that have black soldiers working for them attack the village to steal, to take off everybody as a slave, take off the villagers as slaves, and to steal the ivory they had stored there. And another important thing that happens here is the chief of the Wazari is killed, and Tarzan takes over leadership of the tribe. And I don't think there's any sense that he takes over because he's the white guy. He takes over because he's just the best individual for the job. And we see here that Tarzan is an effective leader of men. I think that's the first time we see that in the Tarzan series. He'd already been shown to be an innovative fighter in single combat, but now we see he can come up with innovative tactics while leading men into battle. And he uses a combination of guerrilla warfare and psychological warfare to terrify the slavers and eventually get the black soldiers to turn against the Arabs and wipe them out. And he frees the Wazari, and he keeps them from burning the village down, and he gets the ivory back. He just pretty much solves the whole problem through effective, innovative leadership. And that becomes another important part, I think, of Tarzan's character in later books. It also cements his friendship with the Wazari, because they turn up in a number of books, at least in one case, in Tarzan of the Lost Empire, a unit showing up to save the day at the end. So there's several important, another example of Tarzan's growth as a person, as he becomes a leader, and getting a strong group of allies who will be his friends through successive novels. And I think I did my summary a little bit quicker, because that cements him as leader of the Wazari. He's still at this point planning to just stay with them, and that will be his life. And then he learns about Opar. And Jess, you were going to talk about those chapters.
Indeed, and that takes us up to chapter 19.
Mm-hmm.
But before I get into chapter 19, just a couple comments, if I may. First of all, that Tarzan chronologue that was mentioned is an excellent resource. It was written by Alan Hansen, published by Wazari Publications, kid you not. I reckon it's still available at that website. If anyone listening cannot find it, you can contact me through my Facebook group for the love of all things Edgar Rice Burroughs, and we'll try to track down a copy. Also, since we're talking Opar, I wanted to be sure to mention Heritage of the Flaming God, also published by Wazari Publications, written by Frank Bruckle and John Harwood, edited by Alan Hansen, who did that chronologue. Heritage of the Flaming God is a series of essays, a collection of essays. The book, there is one essay in there called Heritage of the Flaming God that dwells into the history and mystery of Opar. It is an excellent read, and I highly recommend it.
Cool. Go ahead, Scott.
I was just saying, here. I totally agree. They are fantastic references and resources to have. You might not sit around every week and go through them, but time like this, something to go back and look back and get their perspective or their notes on it. It's very valuable.
Yeah. Well said. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I seethe with jealousy that you guys own that, and I don't yet, the chronology. I am going to eventually, but I just haven't budgeted for it yet. And I'm really looking forward to owning my own copies. So.
Well, they're fun reads, and I would recommend them. So a few other notes here about Opar before I get moving into chapter 19. For me, Opar is an honor to talk about. It's of all the lost cities in Tarzan's Africa, is my favorite. Tarzan goes there more times than any of the other lost cities. He visits there in Return, which we are now, of course. 2 visits. We'll be hearing about a second visit here later on. Jewels of Opar, Golden Lion, and Invincible, and Opar is mentioned in Tarzan Twins with Jad Baljah. So we talked about Heritage of the Flaming God. Of course, there's the Ancient Opar series by Philip Jose Farmer and Christopher Paul Carey, which explores that history of Opar. Opar does get mentioned in the movies, by the way, although we never see it like we see it in these books. Mm-hmm. It's mentioned in at least Tarzan and the Lost City. Legend of Tarzan has a mention of it, and Tarzan and the Lost Safari with Gordon Scott mentions Opar. Now, it may appear in some of the other movies, but those are three of those movies.
Yeah, well, last year's Legend of Tarzan, wasn't Opar the Village of Blacks? Didn't they use the name Opar for them? So they're just using the name and not presenting Opar as it was in the books, but it technically gets an appearance there.
I mentioned it.
Okay.
There were diamonds laying loose on the ground in the movie. I'm not quite sure how that works, but they were picking diamonds up. But you're right, and that's what I meant. It gets a mention, but we don't see the actual city. I'm talking about domes and walls.
Mm-hmm.
We don't see an actual city like is described in this book. So moving into chapter 19, the City of Gold, Tarzan and the Wazari prepare for an expedition to that lost city. Tarzan was aware through talking to the Wazari that there was a nearby lost city with valuable gold and such in it, and had arranged to get them to go there with him, take them there. So 50 warriors, they march for 25 days until finally they reach a mountain. And from that mountaintop, Tarzan can see a city. And let me point out in the videos that will accompany this podcast, one of the pictures that will whiz by is a picture of Tarzan hanging off the side of a cliff. When you study how he's hanging there, it's a pretty precarious position. He has his knife out, I'm not sure why, but he's gazing at Opar in the distance. And there you can see the domes and the buildings and the walls that I was describing. That's a Richard Hescock's artwork, which I highly recommend. That picture is a photograph of a print which I own by Richard Hescock's, and that's certainly one of my favorite pieces.
Cool.
So go ahead. Somebody have something?
Oh, I was just saying cool. Sorry.
Okay. So they march to the ruined walls. Now Opar is in a state of disrepair, and it's just not what it used to be. So you may hear the word ruins, but there's still people living there. Mm-hmm. So Tarzan leads his Wazari into a large building having walls filled with carvings of men and beasts, inlaid tablets of gold, and hieroglyphics. Tarzan remembers reading in the Library of Paris about an ancient race of white people in Africa. Now, everyone, Tarzan and the Wazari, had the feeling of being watched. In fact, the Wazari asked Tarzan to leave this terrible place, because they certainly are well aware of this place. Some of them have been there previously. They've heard legends and stories, and they know that it's just not a safe place to be, and they're not inclined to look around. In fact, they hear a scream, a human-type scream, and the Wazari leave. But Tarzan decides to remain and search for the vault of gold. That scream is repeated as Tarzan approaches the doorway. When Tarzan enters the chamber, it is black with Stygian gloom, and that is a direct quote, Stygian gloom. Immediately, hands clutch at him. Tarzan fights but is overcome by numbers. There's at least 100 beastly priests taking Tarzan to the floor, where he is bound and carried to an open courtyard. Tarzan sees 100 short, stocky men with great beards and receding brows. Their crooked legs are short and heavy, their arms long and muscular. Hescock's, by the way, has another which I don't have a picture of, has another piece of artwork with Law and the beastly priests, which look more like animals in his drawing, but their arms are huge in his drawing. Golden ornaments encircle their arms and legs. The beastly priests have white skin and yellow fangs. And there's reasons for that. Tarzan, they bind Tarzan up. He thinks he might be able to break his ropes, but doesn't do it just yet. The rays of the sun penetrate the courtyard, and 20 beast-like men begin to chant and shuffle around Tarzan. They lift their bludgeons and rush at him. A female figure carrying a bludgeon of gold leaps alongside Tarzan and pushes back the frightful man. I skipped a line. Somewhere's there. They had carried Tarzan out to the courtyard where they began the sacrifice ceremony. Procedure. I'm still talking like an IT person. So Tarzan's all bound up. He's on the verge, and there's a crowd of people around him, and this little ceremony is underway. In chapter 20, we finally meet La, but not just yet. The woman, who is a priestess, cuts the ropes restraining Tarzan, but puts a rope about his neck to lead him to a chamber room that has the altar. Tarzan notices that the females are more symmetrically proportioned than the males, and that's due to their selective breeding styles. In the altar room, Tarzan noticed the skulls in the corners of the altar room and red stains on the altar. Now, which reminds me, I was thinking is that there, someplace the altar of the flaming god is described with grooves in the altar. Now, perhaps I've got that confused with another Tarzan book, or maybe it's not even a Burroughs book. But the grooves in the altar were that when the sacrifice occurs, the blood can run down into those grooves and through the grooves into the cups of the priest and everyone there participating in the ceremony. But I did not find any mention of grooves in Return of Tarzan, so that's a mystery I'll have to dig into later on. But Tarzan realizes when he sees he's in the altar room that he is the guest of honor, meaning he is going to be sacrificed to the flaming god, which is the Oparian religion. Now, a young, beautiful high priestess enters carrying a jeweled knife. This is La. The woman speaks to Tarzan in a language he does not know. Tarzan replies in several languages, including English and French, and maybe another one. But she doesn't understand him. The beastmen lift Tarzan upon the altar. All have small golden cups to hold the victim's blood. As the priestess chants, Tarzan hears a disturbance. The priest raises the knife over Tarzan's heart, but before she can strike, the commotion escalates when another priest has gone mad, demanding to be first in line, swinging his cudgel at anyone within reach. The high priestess tells this insane priest to go to the back of the line. But he, the insane priest, approaches the high priestess, La, who tries to reason with him. Tarzan recognizes the language they're speaking in is the language of the great apes, the Mangani. And as the mad priest prepares to strike the priestess, Tarzan snaps his ropes. And by the time he's on his feet, the room is empty. He hears the sound of running feet coming from a dark tunnel. Tarzan follows. Tarzan finds and kills the mad priest, rescues the high priestess La, and asks her to lead him to freedom. The girl introduces herself. She is indeed La, the high priestess of Opar. Says Tarzan is the kind of man she has been dreaming of since she was a little girl. When you stop and think about it, she's got a pretty lonely life in Opar.
Mm-hmm, she does.
There's no one to talk to, and she's a high priest anyhow, so she is yearning for companionship. And she even questions her religion, which is mentioned in here. La assures Tarzan that she will hide him and then leads him to freedom in a few days. Tarzan follows her to a small room deep in the temple where she says he'll be safe. She leaves. Meanwhile, and that's in chapter 21. You want me to go ahead and cover that one?
Is this like Jane and
yeah, William Cecil Clayton?
Yeah. Actually, why don't you stick to Opar, and then we'll go back to Clayton and Jane has its own little section.
Very well. So we'll just table chapter 21, the castaways, status report on them. We'll table that for a few minutes here. Mm-hmm. So chapter 22, treasure vaults of Opar. La tells Tarzan that the others are furious at his escape, but he is safe in this room for the dead. That's where she has left him. The other people, but not La, now said she was questioning her religion, believe that spirits of the dead sacrifice anyone who lives in that room. In fact, there's an old altar in the room. So a legend is born over time about this room. But La doesn't believe any such thing is going to happen in this room. She says, quote, that the dead are dead. And this is where La expresses doubts about her religion. La leads Tarzan to another room for the night where, after La leaves, Tarzan notices a draft of fresh air. Tarzan looks around, feels the wall, discovers that one wall joins an ancient corridor that had been bricked over. Tarzan dismantles the bricks and follows it to a well shaft. By the aid of the moonlight, he finds the hallway, continues on the other side of the shaft. A great leap leads him onto a room filled with ingots. Tarzan grabs an ingot and then follows another tunnel from that place to conceal the exit high atop a boulder a mile outside the city. Outside in the light, he discovers the ingot he brought with him is virgin gold. Now here's a direct quote from Tarzan. Opar, the enchanted city of a dead and forgotten past, the city of the beauties and the beast, city of horrors and death, the city of fabulous riches. Tarzan finds his Wazari who are contemplating a return for him and leads them back to Opar under the cover of darkness, entering using the same route by which he had just earlier escaped. Tarzan and the Wazari carry off all the gold they can bear, and Tarzan has them leave the gold in a secluded spot and tells the Wazari they can return home. He then buries the gold in a trench at the ancient site of the Dum Dum. The next day, Tarzan... Oh, yes, so he buries the gold there at the Dum Dum. Tarzan decides to visit his cabin briefly, and then he'll catch up to the Wazari. So, in making his way to his cabin, this is on the coastline of Africa now, the same cabin his parents built and he grew up in, or he was born in and such. The next day, he's going to that cabin. He smells man and finds a man and a woman about to be jumped by a lion. He spears the lion, then recognizes the woman clinging to the man as Jane. For a long moment, he aims an arrow at the man, then dropping his aim, he turns sadly towards the village of the Wazari. And this is another growing moment akin to when he did not kill that, I think it was Bazili, the Wazari warrior. Mm-hmm. He elected not to murder William Cecil Clayton, his own cousin, in cold blood, as he was pondering there for just a moment.
I agree with that. It's really a concrete part of Tarzan's character growth, that moment.
And in fact, not to reveal any thunder here, but that sequence of Tarzan finding a man and woman and using his spear to save them from a lion is what's in that chapter we skipped, although it's told in a little more detail there in that chapter. Mm-hmm. Now, still dealing with Opar, chapter 23, 50 Frightful Men, Jane and William Cecil Clayton wonder who it was that saved them and why that person wouldn't show himself. So they return to the safety of the shelter. Jane apologizes for her outbursts, but she does tell William that she could not marry him. William Cecil Clayton. She does tell him that she could not marry him. Well, the next day, Clayton goes hunting. He's worried about Jane's safety, and while he's away, Jane is captured by a band of 50 grotesque gorilla-like savages. Gee, I wonder who that could be. The search party from Opar are out looking for people to kidnap those beastly priests again, are at it, and they take Jane to a ruined city and lock her in a dark chamber beneath. Food and water are provided so that she would be in fit condition to be offered to the flaming god.
Yeah, Opar really is a great creation, I think. It is really one of Burroughs' best lost cities. Am I remembering correctly? I'm sorry, I did go through the novel again, but isn't there a reference? You may have mentioned it and I missed it, to them to be being descendants of Atlantis. Did you mention that, or am I remembering it incorrectly?
Did not mention it, but that reference does appear in 3 of the books. Mm-hmm. It's in Invincible, Golden Lion, and Jewels of Opar, where Atlantis is specifically.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, so they're the remnants of Atlantis, and the men have sort of de-evolved over time.
Right.
Yeah.
The men have actually been mating with apes, mm-hmm. and which has resulted in their beastly appearance. The women that are born, those who look human, are permitted to survive. Those who do not look human are done away with. Mm-hmm. That's explained somewhere in these books. It's not covered here in Return, but it is explained in one of the other books.
Yeah. I actually think Law was manic depressive. If you look at how she behaves here and in Jewels of Opar, she's either like all gooey in love with Tarzan, or she's like enraged to the point where she wants to have him tortured to death. I think if you could take her to a therapist, I think she'd be medicated for manic depressive behavior.
Well, that diagnosis, I've got to mention that I wrote a pastiche where Allah and some of the other evil queens of the Burroughs universe are talking. And she's explaining there's this guy she's really crazy about. She loves him. And someone stands up and says, well, you tried to sacrifice the guy. What do you expect him to do?
Okay. Well, Scott, you were going to... Oh, sorry. Anything else to say about this section before we move on?
Yes, I've got just a little more summary here, which is on the last page, which I skipped over. Bear with me for just a moment. This is reflecting on Tarzan's feelings when he decided not to kill Clayton. Tarzan had thought about not returning to. After that, Tarzan decided not to go back to the Wazari, but to just suffer alone by himself. So he hangs out in the amphitheater of the apes and takes up with the tribe of apes, and even defeat. While they accept him, one of the young bulls goes strutting around, and Tarzan has to fight him to submission, just to prove who's master. So he's happy there, and then the apes are talking about they had seen a group of 50 humans and one white woman, and Tarzan knows who that is. Mm-hmm. Now we can hand it over.
I was going to ask too about Opar. It truly is. It's a magnificent Lost City adventure, and when he repeats and talks more about the Atlantis beginnings and stuff, I also think it was given great honor and treated very respectfully when Philip Jose Farmer added on to the Opar adventures and histories. It's just a marvelous thing. I think it stands up there with Haggard's King Solomon's Mines and Quartermain adventures. Opar is just a fabulous adventure when it shows up in several Tarzan's appearances and other stories. It's a great piece.
That is very well said.
Mm-hmm. I agree completely.
Now, when you're talking about William Cecil Clayton and Jane and the others, this is Tim had mentioned earlier about the pacing by ERB. And way back in chapter 12, he slides in, opens up that chapter, talking about linking the first book, Tarzan and the Apes, and Jane and Cecil or Clayton, and what they did and why they did to fill in that story. So when they show up in Tarzan territory, we get that. And that also ties in with the castaway part here. But the fact that she didn't feel ready to marry yet, because her heart's torn with Tarzan, they decide to go on a yacht trip around the world with a man named Lord Tennington. And this is how they end up coming back from the U.S. and being along the African coast. And in the meantime, after I forgot an important part about Tarzan being an undercover agent when he's now going to Cape Town, he was going under the identity, the name of John Caldwell. So Hazel Strong knows him as John Caldwell. And after all these, while all the Opar adventures that are happening with Tarzan, Hazel Strong ends up in Cape Town with Thuran, who is actually in Polvich. Thuran, who's actually Rokovich, sorry, not Rockovich. Rokovich. I've been
Rokovich.
Flintstones or something.
It's a Russian spy from a Flintstone adventure.
Yes, and she knows him under the name of Thuran. And it's interesting how Burroughs, he talks about him being in love with Hazel Strong. But he also alludes to the fact that she's very rich. I think now we would call it he had a lust for her, but she's an attractive woman, but he isn't so much physically attracted to her, though that might be a bonus and helps him do that. It's the lust for the wealth and money she has. So he's pursuing her and works his way into her world, so people, where he even tells people they're engaged or getting engaged. She has told him she enjoys him as a friend, but isn't ready to go the romantic route. But he's creating his own scenario of how he wants to play out. So now they're in Cape Town, and he's part of her world and family and friends. And one day, while Hazel Strong's in the going through the market area, looks up and lo and behold, there's Jane Porter, who conveniently is on a worldwide cruise with her soon-to-be husband and with Lord Tennington and his yacht staff, crewmates and all that. So, nice way to make it a coincidence to be a believable happenstance of travelers intersecting. But on the coincidence, one of the things that struck me, though, is the world was smaller in those days. And if you read some of the histories, it's amazing the people who ran in different aristocratic or wealthy circles knew other people in other countries or from different societies in different cities because their world was so small. That's how they connected. I was able to relate to that, like when I lived out in LA and worked for a while around the studios and with some other writers out there. And even when we see here on Facebook, other writers and people in the Tarzan world, people we're friends with who could be in Alaska, California, Louisiana, Florida, New York, Minnesota, all over the place. And you end up going to an ECOP or something like that. And you do intersect, and you could find yourself at other places like that. So in one way, those coincidences aren't that unbelievable. I could see where people of that status could end up running into each other.
Yeah, if you're going to Cape Town, there's not a dozen different airlines flying there at different times. You're going to get there by similar routes. One of the few cruise ships that goes there or whatever, for instance. So it isn't that much. I agree. It's not that much of a stretch.
So they end up deciding, or some stuff comes up, and they have to go back up towards England and back to the U.S., go back up along the African coast. So now it'll be Lorne Pennington with Clayton and Jane Porter, and Hazel Strong, Thuran or Rockoff, and his crewmates. And as they're traveling up the African coast, at night they hit a derelict, which sinks their yacht, and now they get split up into different lifeboats. The one with Jane Porter and Thuran and Clayton and a couple of crewmates ends up, by the time daylight comes up, they don't even know where the other boats are. In the course of the story, we find out they're actually only a few miles up the coast from them, but these three with the crewmates are in the boat, but they're all in the boats for quite a while, many days before they drift onto the African coast. And the crewmates, they all realize they're probably going to starve or die. Some of the crewmates, there's personal attacks because they decide they want to eat them alive. So got a little bit of that Opar fangs going, it sounds eating other people type thing. But they, out of despair, end up jumping out of the boats, and they do a lottery in which, using coins, who is going to give themselves up for the other person die so that they can actually have food, do the Donner Party thing in lifeboat. But before they have to do that, fortunately, they end up on the coast. And so the one group of boats are a few miles up the coast, and Jane Porter and her group are on the one boat, and they end up making a shelter, and I think like a little tree shelter where they can live. Maybe that's where we can get the Swiss Family Robinson and Tarzan treehouse motif going. But they're actually only a couple miles from where Tarzan landed, where his cabin was, where his mom and dad died, and where he was born.
Yeah, when I write about that in my book, I actually remark that the Coast Guard should mark that piece of land on Africa on their map, because no matter where you are in the Atlantic, if you get shipwrecked, you end up in that exact spot. Everybody does.
What's that? Search here first.
Yes.
Search here first. And so, Jess, you mentioned about the attack by the lion in Tarzan, seeing that they're there. And I don't want to jump too far up ahead because it'll coincide with what happens there. They do end up, Clayton ends up getting sick and having a fever. The different will end up meeting together. Jane, of course, is captured and taken away. There's another point I want to make about this. They're there for quite a while, actually.
Yeah. Well, it should be mentioned when Clayton was sick, Rokoff just shows his true colors and torments him and won't give him food or water and eventually leaves him and meets up with the other group on his own.
And he was being very crass, and he wanted his way with Jane too. Mm-hmm. So he's putting the moves on her during this whole time here. Well, let me turn on over to you, Tim, on how you reconcile all of this.
Okay, yeah, and I will say about that section that once again we get an example of how a master storyteller Burroughs was. He has another really mini adventure with the whole shipwreck on the boat, starving, some of the people thinking about turning to cannibalism. That's a superb, tense sequence in of its own. And another example of what could have been a nice little a book by itself, and just another example of how well Burroughs paces his story out, that he gets all this comfortably fitting into one novel. But
I also think, a lot of times, having worked on both sides of the desk, sometimes these stories are really, they say, well, the editor saved it.
Mm-hmm.
But considering how Burroughs worked and so many pulp writers worked and submitted their stuff, yes, there were editors, but they're not the way we think of them in the traditional New York literary scene, where one guy worked with Truman Capote for so many years, or Thomas Wolfe, and let's work on your book for 3, 4, 5 years and get it perfect. These were scenarios he sent in, like cliffhangers, to be in this month's magazine and this one, or sometimes the whole thing was in just one magazine, as a special book bonus, novel bonus. So I have to say, an awful lot had to be his natural instinct. It wasn't just the editor and publisher's desk that was pacing him out like.
Yeah, it really had to be. I just wonder if the reason the All Story editor rejected it and he had to take it to a news story magazine was that he thought there was too much story there. But it just was really the worst editorial decision ever to turn down a Tarzan novel.
I just can't believe he turned it down several times, I believe.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, Tarzan learns from the apes that the Oparians have kidnapped Jane. He goes to rescue her. There's another really tense scene where he's scaling up the walls with his rope. That's done really well. And we're just to end it quickly, so we don't have too long a podcast. He gets away with Jane after some great action. So they're reunited in the jungle, and they realize they really need to be together, that they're in love, and they decide they're going to be in love. They go back to the cabin. They reconcile with Clayton, who had found out that that Tarzan had given up the title, that Tarzan was the rightful heir, and had kept that a secret himself. He kind of justified it to himself, saying, oh, well, that's obviously what Tarzan wanted. But he confesses he knew about it, asks for forgiveness. He receives it. It's a really very touching scene. Before he dies, he's able to reconcile with Jane and with Tarzan and show that despite some moral failings along the way, he was a decent human being. Tarzan and Jane reconnect with the rest of the group that was up the coast a little. Thuron tries to shoot Jane, but was it Coddington was his name? Knocks the rifle aside, and Rokoff is captured alive.
Oh, he tried to shoot Tarzan.
Yeah, he tried to shoot Tarzan, and Lord Coddington knocks the rifle aside, I believe, if I remember correctly. So Rokoff is captured. Tarzan even gets back the secret papers that Rokoff had taken from him on the ship. So all the story threads are tied up. Jane's dad is there, who's also an ordained minister, so he's able to marry Tarzan and Jane in his parents' cabin, and that brings the story to an end with Tarzan and Jane married, and Tarzan apparently accepting now that he was going to be a part of civilization after briefly deciding, to just live in the jungle with the apes. He's now married to Jane, and he's going to be a part of civilization. In fact, they won't get back to regularly living in the jungle for a couple of books. They'll be spending a lot of time in England. And that ends. I really like the way he ties up all the plot threads, even the minor ones about the secret papers from the spy thing. He doesn't forget about that. He ties up all the loose ends very nicely, brings the novel to a very, very satisfying end.
Marriage ceremony is a double ceremony too, because Hazel Strong and Lord Tennington fell in love.
Oh, that's right.
He's farther up the beach.
Yes, Lord Tennington. I was getting his name wrong.
Up too.
Yeah.
He lost her.
Mm-hmm. So that is like I can see why it's like amongst our favorites, because it's just such a brilliantly constructed story that has great pacing, and there's no slow parts along the whole way. It's a fun read from beginning to end, and we really do see significant character growth with Tarzan, getting him to the point where he's just a truly heroic character who can be a part of either civilization or the jungle. He'll always prefer the jungle, but he can exist in either venue. So it really is a wonderful novel.
Well, they really come full blast into jungle a couple books later when with Korak, when Jack is there. And I'll skip the stories in between, and whether it's Jack or Jack or which maybe it is. Well, I won't go down that road, but let's just say his son, when he ends up in Africa, and they come down and reinstate themselves down in Africa and end up catching up with him and stuff there too. That seemed to be, after that, the point where they were basically African locked after that, instead of being part of the English society.
Yeah, it happened sometime during during Korak's being missing in the jungle for some years. So, so any final comments from either of you about the novel?
Well, if I may jump in, I want to be sure to say that since I was a small child, I was aware of Tarzan. There was movies on TV, of course. When I began buying comic books, I was certainly a DC Comics fan. That would be in 1961. But I was always looking for the Gold Key Tarzan comics also. So I would routinely scan the spinner racks for comic books and eventually for paperback books. And I'd already read the Whitman Tarzan of the Apes and enjoyed it. But in February 67, I became a committed Tarzan fanatic when I found Return of Tarzan, this very book we've been discussing, the one with Ron Ely on the cover. I have it right here in front of me. Read that book and found out who Tarzan really was. And I was hooked after that.
Yep. I will say just real quickly, we won't do any of the adaptations tonight, but Russ Manning did a great adaptation of Return of Tarzan for Gold Key. And later on, Joe Kubert did one for DC Comics that is also quite excellent.
I got that sitting in front of me, the artist edition. It's beautiful.
Yeah, we have that book at the library at which I work. It is brilliant. So,
and I did want to say about this, going back, I'm going to say it's about 15 years ago, sitting around at an ECOF. I was going to say San Diego Comic Con first, but I believe it was ECOF in Sacramento, talking with Thomas Yates. And I hope I don't pull any of his fire out of this, that it's not a secret project, but we were talking about the books, and both, as I remember, pretty much agreed Return of Tarzan would be really the book, or one of the books that should be made into a movie, because I know there's a lot of stuff to do with going into, Pellucidor and Center Earth, and you got all the creatures and stuff, but here you get Tarzan as he is. Here you get Opar and the Lost City, and the inhabitants of that city, for that type of adventure and mystery. But he said something that I really loved. And I hope I'm not giving away a secret. I don't think I am after 15 years. His ideal way to open up a movie and script like that would be to show the hand of Tarzan holding a piece of paper and opening up the hand and it dropping it, being the paper saying, fingerprints prove that you're Greystoke. And that way, it would kick off with him leaving and then interplaying some of the flashbacks like Burroughs already did in the book, but adding a few more to, especially like when he gets cast away back onto his homeland, showing, flashing back the story about when he's born there by the apes, or meeting Jane, and showing parts of the first book as flashbacks, filling in parts of the actual story of the Return of Tarzan. Because I think Return of Tarzan, anytime I think I hear a rumor they're going to make a Tarzan movie, I'm like, please, do Return of Tarzan and do it right.
That would be awesome.
Indeed.
Yep. Okay, yeah, and the one last thing I wanted to mention is one of the examples of how skilled a storyteller Burroughs is how he gets away with using coincidence so often. We mentioned that, some of the characters always meeting each other, sometimes in different countries from where they were last, or the fact that everybody keeps washing up on that same exact point or being marooned there by pirates or whatever. It's always that same spot on Africa. And a less skilled writer, that would seem very contrived. But with Burroughs, you're having so much fun with the story, and his plots are so well constructed otherwise, that I think you just accept the coincidence as just a natural part of how things happen in Burroughs' universe. And I'm never bothered by his use of coincidence.
It's the ocean currents. The ocean currents just detect any ships with the name Clayton on it or Greystoke on it or James.
Yeah, but it's
even them over to the coast of Africa there near the cabin.
Yeah, but even if you're like being cast away by mutineers who've taken over a ship, it's always that spot as well. So it seems to lead people to that spot no matter what. But it is just an example of how much fun his stories are. That never comes across as contrived or bothersome. It's just a natural part of the story he's telling. So.
Very good.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and we've gone like an hour and 25 minutes, so we probably ought to bring it to an end, or we're going to drive our listeners insane. But so we are planning on doing the Chessmen of Mars next time, and we are having a target date of October 7th to record it. We will not absolutely promise that, but it will be sometime in that general area that we will be able to post a podcast on Chessmen of Mars. I think we all mentioned it as being one of our favorite Mars novels. And with several examples of world building of lost civilizations in that one. Just more examples of how skilled Burroughs was on that. So get out your Geton set and get ready for that for our next one. And just to exit, once again, my name is Tim DeForest. You can go to my Amazon.com author page to find my books and buy them and make me wealthy. Or my blog is comics, old time radio, and other cool stuff. And you guys want to just do a brief intro of yourself one more time as a way of saying goodbye?
Well, I will simply say then my name is Jess Terrell, and you will find me talking Burroughs, not quite 24/7, but as much as I can, and with love of all things Edgar Rice Burroughs. Facebook discussion group.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm Scott Stewart, and it was a real pleasure talking with you guys again tonight. And you can find me on the web, usually making a comment on one of their Facebook pages.
Okay, and once again, thank you all for listening, and we'll be back with episode 5 soon. Thank you all.